Hello, this is an activity that I've done with my Algebra 2 students with end behavior of polynomials. It's also one that I've done with end behavior of other types of functions, but this one specifically focuses on polynomials and what happens when we have a different degree, if it's odd or even, what happens with the leading coefficient and the number of terms and how that turns and how that affects the end behavior. So students go through using their TI-84 graphing calculator. They plug in the function to start. They make a sketch of the graph over here. Then they write in the degree of the polynomial. So in this case it would be 3. They would write the leading coefficient. In this case it's -1. So with the leading coefficient category, they're looking for well, what they will be looking for is whether it's negative or positive, because a different coefficient doesn't really affect the end behavior, but if it's negative or positive, that does affect the end behavior. So they'll be looking into that later on. And then the number of turns would come from the equation and the degree of the polynomial. And then that helps us determine the left end behavior and the right end behavior, if it's rising, if it's going up, falling if it's going down, and then this kind of leads them to positive infinity and negative infinity for each one. So they'll go through a few different functions with different leading coefficients and different degrees, whether it's odd or even, and then they'll be able to come up with the pattern that when the leading coefficient is positive, the degree is even, that the graphs would, then they would kind of talk about what it looks like at the end. If it's going up or down on the left or right, and then they'll go through each one and determine how those different properties of polynomials affect the end behavior. Okay, then they'll go through some extra problems, kind of matching the graph with which ones have a positive leading coefficient, negative, odd degree, even degree, and then a combination of the two. So they'll be matching these 6 graphs to each of these questions. So it kind of gets them thinking about these different types of questions and related to the actual picture of the graph. You could also have them plug these in their calculator instead of giving them the picture. You could just give them the function and then have them plug it into their calculator and determine this from there. And a couple more questions. One has to do with, like number 8 has to do with a higher degree, what would happen, and what would happen even if it's a big number based on those patterns that we talked about. Then they can draw the pictures, what it would look like if the degree is even, leading coefficient is positive, and all combinations that we've talked about. So that is the end behavior activity. I would do this during the polynomials unit with my Algebra 2 students.